Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Prime Minister to make a statement on the Register of Ministerial Interests and the Ministerial Code.
Minister Alex Burghardt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to confirm that the latest list of Ministers' interests was published last week on the 19th of April by the Prime Minister's Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests, Sir Laurie Magnus. The list has been deposited in the House libraries and is, of course, also available online on gov.uk. I note that the question put by the Honourable Lady from North East Fife talks of a register of ministerial interests. I'm afraid that, for the sake of clarity, I must point out that this is not an accurate term. It's important that I provide a little explanation on the list and what it contains and the role that it performs. The Ministerial Code makes clear that ministers must ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between their public duties and their private interests, financial or otherwise. It is their personal responsibility to decide whether and what action is needed to avoid a conflict or the perception of a conflict, taking account of advice received from their Permanent Secretary and the Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests. On appointment, each minister makes a declaration of all interests. They remain under an obligation to keep that declaration up to date throughout their time in office. Ministers are encouraged to make the fullest possible disclosure relating to themselves, their spouses and partners and close family members, even where matters may not be necessarily relevant. The information supplied is then reviewed and advised upon by their Permanent Secretary and also by the Independent Advisor. Where needed, steps are taken to avoid or mitigate any potential conflicts of interest. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the process by which ministers' interests are managed. It is thorough, ongoing, and it provides individual advice to all ministers that reflects their circumstances and responsibilities. Twice a year, a list is then published covering those interests that are judged by the Independent Advisor to be relevant to each minister's portfolio. The list is not a register. It is designed to be read alongside the Register of Members' Financial Interests that is maintained by this House, and also the Register of Members' Interests that operates in the other place. For this reason, the list does not generally duplicate the information that is available in the registers. The Independent Advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, makes it clear in his introduction to the list published last week that it would not be appropriate for all of the information gathered as part of the ministerial interest process to be made public. He states that such a move would represent an excessive degree of intrusion into the private affairs of ministers that would be unreasonable, particularly in respect of honourable members' families. I am sure that honourable members will understand that the system is designed to gather the fullest amount of information, provided in confidence, so that the most effective advice can be given. Madam Deputy Speaker, all ministers of the Crown uphold the system that I've described. This is true for all ministers, including the Prime Minister, who has been clear that all of his interests have been declared in the usual way. It's also true for everyone all the way down to and including an assistant whip. In the latest list, the Independent Advisor highlights the importance of ministers and their Permanent Secretaries remaining alert in the context of their respective portfolios if ministers' interests change. And this is, of course, right. Importantly, though, Sir Laurie Magnus also provides his opinion as Independent Advisor on Ministers' Interests that, quote, any actual, potential and perceived conflicts have been or are in the process of being resolved.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When he was appointed, the Prime Minister promised he would govern with integrity, and he went inside number 10, and his first act was to appoint ministers. And of that cohort, 3 have now departed in controversy, including 2 in relation to allegations of bullying. One thing the Prime Minister did not do at that time was to publish an updated ministerial list of interests. That was finally released last week, after 320 days since the last publication. That list does not include the interests of ministers from the last year who have either been dismissed or resigned, like, for example, the Right Honourable Member for Stratford-upon-Avon. Madam Deputy Speaker, that means on my count there are almost 120 missing registrations from that period, and nor is there any setting out of what is referred to by the Ethics Advisor in his introduction to the list as actual potential and perceived conflicts which are in the process of being resolved. I would hope the Minister could give more clarity on that situation. Will the Minister accept his Ethics Advisor's statement that the Minister's interests are only clear when reading the ministerial list and MPs' registers together, and that is difficult to do with one published monthly and the other twice a year, or, as we have found, much less? Members rightly disclose their interests regularly because transparency is essential. The Leader of the House promised swift action to strengthen the system and agreed to consider more regular reporting. It would suggest in the publication last week that she has failed in that effort to provide more transparency. So will the government end this undemocratic two-tier system and bring forward publication to every 28 days? And will the government publish the missing interests of former ministers? It's absurd to think that had the former Deputy Prime Minister resigned just 3 days earlier, we would never have been told what his interests were during his time as Justice Secretary. And like ministerial registrations of interests, a key principle of the Ministerial Code, so too is behavioural standards. Last week, the former Deputy Prime Minister was found to have bullied civil servants in line with the definition under the Code. According to the independent report, he acted in a way which was intimidating and involved an abuse or misuse of power in a way that undermines or humiliates. But ministers have remained silent. Will the government therefore publish any advice the Prime Minister was given on conduct before appointing the former Deputy Prime Minister? Is it the view of the government that the former Deputy Prime Minister did breach the Ministerial Code? Will the Minister affirm that there is a duty on ministers under the Code to uphold the impartiality of the civil service? And will he accordingly affirm that impartiality today? And finally, does he acknowledge that the government's silence is deeply damaging and demoralising for hard-working officials?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question. She will be aware that Sir Laurie Magnus, who took up his post in December, has said that he will return to the regular cycle of publications. This list is his. He has oversight of it. It would be wrong if the government were to interfere in that process. And we will obviously continue to engage absolutely fully with him to make sure that the list is up to date and reflects the ongoing interests of ministers so that the system can operate effectively. On the point that she makes about the former Deputy Prime Minister, she will know from listening to previous statements and debates in this House that there were no formal allegations made against the Right Honourable Member from Esher and Walton before the Prime Minister appointed him. The moment those formal allegations were made, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister agreed that there should be an independent investigation. Adam Tolley Casey conducted his investigation, and the Deputy Prime Minister, the then Deputy Prime Minister, then resigned. On her point about civil service impartiality, of course we accept and respect civil service impartiality. It is one of the things that makes government work so effectively in this country.
Thanks very much for watching that video all the way to the end. And if you liked it, I've got some better news for you. PoliticsJOE is in the process of launching a podcast. Live in a couple of weeks' time, it's called The Pubcast. Link below, probably somewhere in the comments or the description, something like that. Check it out, subscribe so you get ready for our first episode. It's coming soon. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or any of those other slightly weirder platforms. See you soon.